Leonardo da Vinci said that art is never finished, only abandoned. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about today is how do you know when you're done? How do you know when you've started your script, you've worked on it, or your draft of a novel, or whatever it is you're working on. You started from beginning to end, you've gone through revisions, you've done all that stuff, and you're just like, is it ready to show? I'm not quite sure. And so what we're going to do, we're going to talk about what are some of the things that you probably should have done and some things to think about to help you know if you're done or not, because it's hard to know when you're done. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for liking, subscribing if you haven't done that, leaving comments if you want, ask questions. I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Let's jump in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some tips or maybe a checklist if you really want to call it that. These are just some things that I do to help me know if I'm done or not, because I can noodle and pick on a script ad infinitum, right? I can do it forever, and I don't want to do that. I want to try to get it out there. I want to do things with it. So I'm guessing you probably want to do that at some point, but how do you know that it's ready? So these are some things that I try to do and make sure that I've done, and it helps me know if I'm ready to share it or not. The first question you should ask is, have you stepped away from it for a little bit? Just some time, at least a week, preferably 2 or 3 or more if you have time to do that. I prefer to step away from things for about 3 to 4 weeks before I come back to them if I have time to do that. If I don't, I take as much time as I can, but I give myself some time to step away. One of the things I will usually do is I'll start noodling and working on another story. I'll start trying to figure out another story just to get my head in a different space so that when I come back to my draft, I have some fresh eyes and I can look at it and say, oh, okay, this is working, this isn't working. It's just a little easier for me to approach that. So first question, have you stepped away for a bit? The second, fourth, and sixth tips I'm going to give you are all the same, but they're like, there's this process that you kind of have to work through. So the question is the same. Have you edited it? Have you gone through your story? So first take some time away, then you come back and you work through it again. You're going to edit, you're going to take it apart and put it back together. What happens in these edit steps? So 2, 4, and 6. What happens in the edit steps is the first time you do it, you're really looking at a lot of the big picture things, the story stuff. Is this working? Is this character arc working? Are all these pieces and the big pieces, do they fit together? Does this move into this? Does it make sense? What if I switch this whole thing around? What if I move this whole sequence later? Like all that stuff, that's really your first edit. And because you've had time to step away, when you come back to it, it's a little easier to look at it and see what's working and what's not working. So you want to start with the macro and start moving down to the micro. The trap a lot of people fall into is the first time through, they start worrying about fixing all of the grammar and all that stuff. Grammar tends to fix itself as you fix the story because you're working on things and it makes more sense. You're able to state it more clearly and it just starts to fix itself. So in your early revisions, don't worry about grammar stuff. Don't worry about commas, punctuation, all that stuff. Now, before you get to the next step, yes, at least do a grammar pass where you're specifically paying attention and trying to find all those things. But if you miss some at this point, don't worry about it. Number 3 is you want to get other writers to read it. Maybe you're in a Facebook community where you have some friends that you could be like, hey, would anybody be interested in reading this? I'm happy to trade pages with you or trade scripts with you. I'll give you notes if you can give me notes. I just need some feedback about what's working, what's not working, what you're responding to, what you're not responding to. Don't worry about grammar stuff. I'm just looking at story. I want to make sure my story is working. And when you give it to other writers, they can more accurately pinpoint where there are problems and why there's a problem there. So sometimes the solutions they give you aren't the right solutions, but typically if they're identifying a problem, it's a problem that you need to figure out how to address or how to smooth over or do something. Okay, then it comes back to you. Now it's time to edit again. So number 4, edit again. Again, start macro, go micro. Take the notes you were given and say, okay, that's a problem, but maybe you resolve it in a little bit different way than what they're suggesting, and that's perfectly fine. But again, in this stage, start macro, get all the way down. Your last step's going to be just a grammar pass, just a last grammar pass. And then you're going to share it again. But this time you want to share it with some non-writers, people that aren't in the industry, people that don't write. Maybe they just like to read stories. Maybe they're just a friend from work or somebody like that. They know you're right and they're like, hey, I'd love to read something of yours sometime. Take them up on it. Like, hey, I've finished a story. Would you mind reading it and just give me some notes? I'll give you some questions. And what you want to do is give them some pointed questions. Give them questions like, Is this working? Does it make sense? Was there any place you were confused? Was there any place where you were worried? Was there any place you wanted to check out, or that you were bored? Where were things you were excited about? Just questions like that to ask about their engagement. So the first group of readers, the other writers, your focus is on asking them to make sure the story is working. When you start asking non-writers, your focus is on the storytelling. What's their emotional experience? Are they engaging with the story in the ways you want them to engage with? What do they think about it? How do they feel about it? Do they like things? Do they not like things? This is going to be really helpful for your next stage, which is, yes, you guessed it, one more edit. So now you've got notes from your non-writer friends, and again, you're going to do the whole thing, macro first, then to micro. So start with the bigger picture things, then start going. Now, what you will notice when you get to this stage is the first time you did your edit, it's number 2, the first time you did that, you were fixing lots of macro things. Lots of macro things, not as many micro, proportionally. The more you go down, most of your macro stuff has now been fixed. So now you're starting to fix all the micro stuff. So you're fixing your micro things a lot more proportionally than your macro things, because your story should be mostly working at this point. Now what you want to do is now you want to spend some time polishing. A polish is where you just go through and you make sure every little thing is consistent and is clear, that each sentence is clear, that there's not another way to make it tighter, right? Screenwriting is about economy. If I've got 3 words and I can replace it with 1, I want to replace it with 1. I want to make it as much white space on the page so people read it fast. They get done, they're like, wow, that was a great read. It was a fast read. I love it. Let's make it. That's what you want. You want a fast read. And that's what polishing is about. It's about finding the more economical ways to do it. It's also about making sure you're being consistent. So how you're using ellipses, for example, in your draft. You want to make sure you're being consistent with their use all throughout your story. This is also where you find your last bits of grammar and misspellings or whatever it is, right? That you've named a character a specific name and that's spelled right all the way through. All of that stuff, that's what a polish is. It's kind of like the last little bit. You shouldn't be changing anything big at this point. You've already fixed the macro stuff. You've gone down. You've even started to fix the punctuation and some of the grammar and things like that. But now what you're trying to do is polish. Now you're trying to make it pretty, right? I'm trying to make it shine. So I'm trying to make it economical. I'm pulling it together. When you've done that, then you need to ask yourself this question. This is a question I ask myself, and I try to do this every time. So I will literally, and some of you may think like, wow, that's a lot. I will literally day after day, one time a day until this event happens. I will read through my script and fix anything I see every day. And if I get through a day where I haven't changed anything, I'm done. Now, this doesn't mean things like, well, if I make this change, it's kind of like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, where it's like, it doesn't really make any difference. I don't count those. If it's like better, like, oh, I can't believe I missed these punctuation elements. Okay, well, I'm going to read it another day and another day. It usually takes me about 4 or 5 times to get through it at this point, because I've gone through all these drafts, because I've gone through all these edits, because I've gone through all these moments where I'm like, okay, I think this is ready. I want to make sure that I personally, it's my story, that I don't bump on anything, that I can go all the way through and I'm satisfied. If I can do that where I am satisfied, because I'm picky, if I'm satisfied, then hopefully anybody else I show it to is going to be satisfied. Your goal when you show somebody your script, especially professionally, is you don't want them to stop reading. When they open page 1, you don't want them to stop reading until they get to the end. Misspellings, mispunctuation, misformatted things, inconsistencies, those are all bad. Things that are too wordy, all that stuff. I get rid of all of it. Polish it, make it clean, make it pretty, make it good, where you don't bump on anything. If you're still bumping on something, it's not right. Fix it. Then when you don't bump, now you're ready to show. Now, does that mean that people are going to be like, oh, this is perfect, let's go make it as is? Probably not. They're going to want to change some things, and that's fine. That's part of the process. But when you're starting out your job, you don't want people to bump on it. You want them to just go all the way through. Hopefully this has been helpful to you. Hopefully that helps you with your process of trying to figure out, am I done or not? Because you can work on it forever and ever and ever, and you just got to find a way to be like, okay, here's where my end is. So maybe my end that I have is not necessarily your end, but hopefully this will help you at least have a plan. So now that you have a plan, if you want to alter it, feel free. And if you have other steps or processes, put them below. Again, thank you for watching, liking, subscribing, hit the bell, all that stuff. I really do appreciate it. And as you're telling a story, and when you tell a story that matters. See you later.